Good morning, and I'm delighted to welcome everyone to our final event in this post-COVID webinar series on the state of sales enablement, evaluating how the impact of the COVID pandemic is affecting sales, marketing, and enablement strategy, its functions, and performance within your business. My name is Dave Irwin, and I have been a sponsor of and involved with each of these webinars, this being the sixth in a series that started May 19th, just 4 months ago. It has been quite a journey from conducting the most extensive body of research in sales enablement starting in mid-March to today's final presentation on the findings, insights, and conclusions that can be drawn from it. You will hear today why the 4 P's of marketing, product, price, place, and promotion are no longer effective as pillars of commercial success. Today we have bloated commercial systems and blown up pipelines that must be rebuilt, but the old methods aren't going to work in this environment. To solve these issues, companies must embrace a different approach that pivots from focusing on your products to focusing on your customers' outcomes. That's the bottom line. It is vital to your commercial health and profitable growth, both short and long term. It is also a tremendous opportunity to drive change and improve not only commercial health, but competitive advantage. GoToCustomer is a different approach that does exactly this, focuses on customers. And it is key to success in the modern digital post-COVID environment we are now in. It addresses head-on the complexity of pivoting from a product-centric go-to-market model to one based on customer outcomes. If it was easy, it wouldn't be so hard. One of the main research findings is the extent and degree of the disease that makes it hard to pivot, our collective villain, which is what we call Productitis. It is like the invisible gas in the coal mine, and I've discovered even when you think you've gotten rid of it, it creeps back in surreptitiously. It is powerful, and it takes a disciplined approach to overcome it. Since May, we have published an enormous volume of perspectives and insights regarding the current state of enablement, the different perspectives of so many in the community, and how to address Productitis effectively. Today, we will provide the foundation for a path forward we call GoToCustomer and how to work quickly to implement it in your organization. Now, for those of you who have been part of this series, it's been a journey of discovery as new insights and perspectives have been shared throughout a 4-month period, building on each other to provide new ways of understanding where you are, thinking about how to improve performance quickly, and new approaches for doing exactly that. If you have missed some of these or want to be able to review all of them, they are available at growthenablement.com, and this last one will complete the series and be available for you there after the session. So now I am happy to introduce Scott Santucci, the leader of all this comprehensive post-COVID research and its findings, to summarize it all and share what it takes to implement a GoToCustomer strategy within your business.
Thank you very much, Dave, and good morning to everybody. I look forward to this session. As always with our webinars, what we'd like you to do is feel comfortable, knowing full well that we're going to cover a lot of material. We're going to provide you the recording and the deck afterwards. If you're the type of person that likes to engage, please feel free to join us on the chat. We're going to have discussion. If you don't like that and like to pay attention, ignore it because it will be distracting. So without further ado, let's get into this ground because we do have a lot to cover. As Dave mentioned, we've been doing some research, and one of the things that we want to center on this idea and this overall theme is that sales is simple and simple is hard. And what we want to do is highlight and keep that in the back of our mind, because this has been a journey that started out very simply. It started out in March on a podcast where Brian Lambert and I have a podcast called InsideSalesEnablement.com. And we invited a few experts to join us to figure out what this COVID stuff was all about, right? So that we published that at the end of March. And joining us was Dr. Howard Dover from the University of Texas, Dallas. We had Kunal Mehta, who's a commercial executive at private equity firm TCV. And we had Lindsay Gore, who's an account executive at Microsoft, to help us sort this stuff out. And what we found was, oh my gosh, there's a lot of change happening here. We need to lean in and understand what the impact of COVID is. I'm grateful that we did that. By April 8th, we had 102 surveys. We designed a survey of sales enablement leaders to figure out where things are heading. It was an open-ended survey response. To figure out how to sort out open-ended survey responses, we elicited 43 experts who either myself or Brian have known for many years that we trust their opinions on to review this open-ended feedback. We had 6 panel discussions of different cohorts to look at that information. And then we started with our webinar series. So the webinar series was to provide insights, just-in-time findings to help people navigate what's going on with COVID. Since that time, since May 15th, we've had 33 exclusively post-COVID episodes. This is our 6th keynote quality website or webcast. We've had over 100 inquiries or discussions about the material in here. And one of the topics that's come up is this idea of a commercial ratio. There are 57 companies now that are using it from a tops-down perspective to drive their commercial results. So that's a lot of impact. How do we synthesize all of this stuff and recognize that we're in a new world? And our conclusion is that we need a new way to think about how we manage our commercial system, and we call that GoToCustomer. So what we're going to do is go through that, and really going back to that sales is simple, simple is hard. Markets don't write checks, customers do. So when we think about that, and we think about what we're experiencing in this post-COVID world, I think all of us will agree COVID has been the biggest driver of digital transformation than anything combined. So when you think about what a transformation is, it's from what to what. And when we're thinking about what our focus is in our sales and marketing endeavors, it used to be focusing on responding to demand. Our argument is you need to be co-creating demand with customers, which means a shift from the new P's that create a shift for new P's that Dave mentioned earlier. We need to be helping clients envision what's possible with what they can do with us. We need to help our clients figure out patterns because every company, every customer, every B2B customer, every client think they're a unique snowflake, but they're not, or else there wouldn't be markets, right? So how do you help them figure out what patterns are? You have to give clients a path to figure out what's possible based on their patterns, and you have to give them proof along the way. These are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about. So what we need to do is create a go-to-customer strategy. And one of the things that we're going to do throughout this session is build on what this go-to-customer strategy is. So the first part is we need to be able to translate our strategy into what's possible for customers. We need to allocate our resources based on execution patterns. We need to do targeted enablement based on a formulaic path for results for our customers. And then we need to think about a growth yield based on proven results. So the new 4 Ps, this is the basic construct. We're going to fill in the rest of the blanks as we go. So what are we going to tell you in this session? We're going to tell you these 7 things, and we've broken this down into these different modules. Again, please remind yourself that you're going to be able to replay and listen to them. But number 1, sales and marketing tactics are antiquated for the modern world. Number 2, productitis is the disease. Make sure you understand it before you start treating it and going off and doing random acts. Clarify your economic value to your customers and where you're taking them. Make your bets to give yourself the best chance to win. Activities do not drive results. Move to integrated campaigns. Stop trying to fix salespeople. Orchestrate the environment instead. You need a go-to-customer strategy to thrive in the new economy. So to be able to pay that out, what we wanted to do is provide a little bit of setup of some things that we've learned that will help you digest this information. So one thing that we need to be all aware of as human beings, all of us have this condition of change blindness. And the reason that I'm showing you this picture here, and I think that's really important, at 32 degrees, this stuff on the left, ice, which is a mineral actually by scientific standards, transforms into a fluid. I'll ask you, can anybody here on this call tell the difference between 32 degrees and 33 degrees? We can't. We can't notice that, but the environment around us changes dramatically. At least that's how it changes dramatically. The chemistry changes dramatically from H2O, frozen H2O, to liquid H2O. So what does that have to do with anything? This one little molecule that we're looking at has fundamentally changed the economy. Now the question is, how much has it changed, and will it go back to the way it was before? To give you a frame of reference, how much stimulus has happened post-COVID and the impact of what this is in terms of economies, we haven't seen this level of investment since World War II. Germany, 60% of their GDP has been invested to help create stimulus packages for post-COVID. In the United States, it's 14%. These are unheard of amounts. So in order to figure out how things are going to merge and what we can do to help our companies, we need to put a new prescription in place, because today what we're seeing is a little foggy, and we need to have a different set of lens to see the road ahead. So to share with you that our customers expect a cohesive experience with us. We all know this. Humans, all of us have a bias that prevents us from seeing the whole picture. We know our customers want a cohesive experience because we want a cohesive experience for every time we buy something. Yet inside our companies, we're organized in silos and everybody wants something concrete. But concreteness and clarity is different depending on different individuals. Some can perceive conceptual, some perceive the world through emotions. Some of us want to see the world through deliverables, some of us through activities, some of us through facts. So part of our challenge that we need to be able to bear is, if we want to bring a whole bunch of people together, we have to be aware of this and be empathetic for it. So we need mental models required to see past our silos. So some of the things that I'm going to ask you to just park on the side as you go through this is, think about, instead of looking at individual parts through your bias as a salesperson, as a marketer, or as an analyst, or whatever it is, try to find connections. Instead of trying to analyze every little individual piece part, be light and see how all of this stuff fits together. Instead of thinking first this, then that, recognize that the world of sales is nonlinear. So we have to confront that and be okay with it. And then instead of looking at everything through a lens and blame somebody else, oh, that's finance's fault, or that's marketing's fault. Let's look at the relationships here, because we are all on the same team and we're in service of our customers. Okay, having said that, those qualifiers will help us go through it. Let's pay out the first observation. Sales and marketing tactics are antiquated for the modern world. To investors, your company is a value engine. So this is one of those synthesis things. You have a whole bunch of individual roles involved in strategy and creating value. You have a whole bunch of roles figuring out your portfolio and your products and services and capabilities and how you deliver it. What we're highlighting is there's a whole bunch of people involved in the commercial system of value communications. So that's what we're highlighting. We're not looking at individual roles, we're looking at the system. And this is the way that your investors see it. What we're zooming in is the value communications process, or that commercial system. It's really just communications. And a communications model is as simple as this. You have an audience, which is your customers. There are interactions between your company and that audience. There are messengers. So those would think about those as all your client-facing employees. And then you have a message, a value message, which is the sum part of all your capabilities. What I'm asking you to not think of is that message is the 3 bullet points that you do in a pitch deck. It's the sum total of what the overall experience is that your audience or customers have. The problem that we have is that the audience just doesn't see value in the things that we're doing in sales and marketing. 13% of C-level IT executives perceive their interactions with salespeople value, and only 11% of business executives find that to be the case. The reason is that your company simply isn't preparing your salespeople to connect the dots with customers. If you look at this data, 62% of those executives say that salespeople are knowledgeable about their products and services, but only 24% are knowledgeable about their business, or 23 can relate to their role and responsibility. 22 understand their issues. 21% have examples or case studies to share with me. Flip that around. If you were an executive making a buying decision, wouldn't you expect the person that you're working with to be able to know about your business, know what you do for a living, understand what your problems are, and have simple examples to help share? I think you'd expect that too. We're off kilter. So really what it comes down to is, because we're so focused on our silos and our stuff, we are gambling with our investors' money. It's almost like you pull the slot machine and you got your fingers crossed and go, cherry, cherry, cherry. Got your fingers crossed up. Let's put another nickel in. And we don't need to make investments or gamble with our customers' money. We should know what our audiences care about. We should know what types of messengers we need to be interacting with that audience, and we should know what our messages are. From an investor standpoint, then, the commercial system that you're building looks like this. You have a lot of different people. You have a lot of infighting. You're paying a lot of attention to a lot of different metrics that just don't matter. You've got air cover coming in with more and more stuff, more and more random acts of enablement, and you're stuffing a whole bunch of things through a old and broken lens that just simply doesn't work anymore. For proof, here's some of the evidence. So we had an entire session on what the commercial ratio is. Please feel free to go look at it. A lot of people are interested in this and have a lot of different perspectives. But simply put, TCV is a private equity firm that we were able to partner with to create some of these metrics. And from their viewpoint, they're looking at how much money is spent in sales and marketing and whether or not it's driving revenue growth. And what's interesting about this simple ratio, it's just a measure on what that system is. And we've created a scorecard. So think about it as this is a valve. If you're under 0.75, that's unsustainable. You're spending way too much money on sales and marketing for the return. Between 0.75 and 1.25, that's balanced, that's optimized. And if you're higher than that, well, the point of view here is that perhaps you're not taking enough risks and you should be focused on challenging yourself. Now, with that being said, if you were to calculate, again, looking at it from a holistic standpoint, and look at this chart and look at how you're setting up your sales force to be stuck in between, think about on the message side, all the company environment, changing business models, difficulty configuring solutions, inconsistent messaging and content, misalignment, administrative burden, too much technology. You're throwing a lot of stuff at the problem on the message side. On the audience side, most companies are unaware or unempathetic about all the changes that are going on. How many stakeholders involved? Do we really have the right tools to be able to navigate or help our salespeople navigate stakeholders? The data that we highlighted earlier indicates we do not. And then when we look at how we structure our sales force with job design, sales models, comp plans, boy, it's a lot of overburden. And for what? What's the focal point? So really what we're highlighting here is a situation, we have a system that just doesn't have coordination. And customers don't really care about all of those details. What they care is having value added to them. So in order to simplify this particular model, we need to design your commercial system to drive contracts. Contract is the one thing to concentrate on, because a contract is that agreement between a customer of what they want and the salesperson's conversation of what you have, all those capabilities. So that's pretty simple. Unfortunately, simple is hard. So let's talk about what prevents this from really happening. Productitis is the disease. Understand it before you treat it. So here's our view of productitis. Productitis is a condition that exists when you believe the features and functions of your products and services are more valuable than how your customers experience what you're providing. You can read the rest of it, but just let that sink in and just think about your company and what you think is important and all of the activities that you're working on right now, whether or not they're adding value to your customers and what that experience is. Productitis normally creates a lot of waste and inefficiency, which can be annoying to investors, hence the commercial ratio, but it can be fatal for your business in dynamic industries and in highly competitive markets. How would you go about diagnosing productitis? How do you make it real? How do you know whether you have it? So imagine this is a scorecard. I'm not going to make the value judgment of where to put these markers in between. Think about it yourself. If you have a go-to-customer focus versus a go-to-market focus. So think about, how do you focus on what the value is? Is the value on the outcome, or is the value on your product? How would you describe those attributes of value? Are they the capabilities that your customers require, or are they the features of what your products do? How do you gauge? What barometer do you use to gauge whether you're valuable or not? Do you gauge yourself based on the experiences of the wallet owners and whether you're adding value to them, or are you comparing yourself against competitors? How do you judge the impact of what you're providing? Do you have measurable results for your customers, or are they based on the benefits that your individual features and products have? How do you relate to your customers? Are you relating them through experiential situations and scenarios that they can relate with and identify with? Or are you asking them to understand use cases of your product? How do you prove what you're doing is valuable? Are you giving them benefit realization and a journey and a game plan on how to get there? Or do you expect them to figure it out by watching a demo of your products and services? So when you have productitis, and you can judge for yourself to the degree what it is, if you're on the customer side, this creates a lot of confusion and friction. And that friction at the end of the day creates friction between that whole communication system, between the audience, the message, and the messenger. Productitis infects the whole ecosystem as a whole. So your customer's world is complex and it's always changing. Your world is complex, it's always changing. So productitis becomes this massive tax on the ability to communicate value between your salesperson and your customer. That tax is measured by that commercial ratio that we talked about. And that's the way to gauge what that looks like. So how do we observe productitis coping strategies? Well, there's basically 3 coping strategies, whether you know it or not. The most prevalent coping strategy companies have is the show up and throw it model, which we ask our customers to deal with it. The second scenario is, well, let's get salespeople to do it. That's their job, isn't it? So let's try to train it. However, only about between 10 and 20% of salespeople can do this instinctively. It's very, very challenging to be able to take lots of information and connect the dots and make it relevant to customers. And the reason that it's even becoming more difficult for salespeople is, even if they do have the skill to be able to do it, the speed of how much change is happening becomes overwhelming. So the only way that you're going to be able to do this is to what we call orchestrate simplicity, and to design out that complexity. So in order to do that, you need to have a different kind of mindset. And whenever we say the word complexity, most people run from it. We're asking you to run into it. And complexity really actually is simple. There are parts, individual piece parts, and then there are connections, how connected people are. So what you want to do is you want to understand how many parts, think about any stakeholders or the number of attributes required to solve a problem, and how interconnected, interwoven those scenarios are. Now, before we pay out something different, we wanted to highlight there are companies that actually do this. Here's a company, and this headline from SaaS to really get your attention. The biggest vertical SaaS success story of all time. This is a company called Veeva. Veeva is a specialized CRM technology tool for life sciences. And when you look at their commercial ratio, it's 1.26. When you go and read their annual report, you can see right here, they have a section in there for investors. We embrace the concept of running into complexity. you can go read about how they talk about it and compare how differently their view of complexity is from your company. So there's an example. So we talked about that. So what do you do about it? You do about it through orchestration. And this is a word that we're going to keep bringing up over and over and over again. But really, it's about orchestration is about using design to design out the parts and connections to create simplicity. That's it. So how do you design it out? You need to start thinking in systems. That's why we shared with you those 4 lenses at the beginning. And when you think about it, you have the audience, model out your customers' expectations. 2, then map what the messages are based on those customers. And then 3, match the messenger to the audience. It's this simple. The difficulty is a lot of us want to read left to right, and we're just so accustomed to think linearly, but this is not how you design out or solve a systems or holistic problem. Okay, so what have we paid out for you here? We've paid out 2 things on a GoToCustomer strategy already. Look at the progress we're making. So we've got the what's possible, patterns, path, proof. And now what we did is say, hey, we have to be orchestrated. And we orchestrate by designing out complexity by understanding the parts, understanding the connections, and then making something simplified. Okay, so we're making progress. Step number 3, clarify your economic value to customers and where you're taking them. What journey are you taking them? So if we want to cheat the house, and instead of just gambling our customers' money, what we need to do is figure out what are the values here that we want in the first place. What kind of payouts are we looking for? How do we rig the system? So what we're going to concentrate first on, model the audience. So let's figure out what that blue question is, that question mark. So these are things that are knowable. We want to create value by simplifying the commercial experience for our customers. What do we know already? We know what is the perception of value from customers. The salespeople clearly show they understand my business issues and can plainly articulate to me how to solve them. This is directly from executive buyers. This is not rocket science. This is simple, but making this is really, really hard. So part of what we have to do is we have to make sure that we're understanding the different patterns of complexity. Because if we design a sales model or a go-to-market or a go-to-customer model, working backwards from this, we have to realize that what simple is and what's valuable is in the eye of the beholder. What's interesting is customers perceive value also based on complexity. So if you look at this chart, on the y-axis are parts. So think about that as the number of stakeholders involved, and also think about as the number of moving pieces that your customer has to digest. On the bottom axis, think about connections. How interwoven are the attributes of the solution and how connected all of the people are. So just think that way. Now, when you think of that way, if there's not a lot of connections and not a lot of parts, the buying activity really is to complete tasks. That's going to be delegated either to procurement people or lower level people. Just give me a bid on X, Y, and Z, and we'll figure it out. That's the perception of value. When we think a little bit more, not a lot of connections, but a lot of moving parts. Well, we want more service, but less spend. In other words, why don't you consolidate all of this different spending into one motion? So think about if you're Staples, how would you consolidate all office spending across all of the different sites at J&J? Then there's a lot of connections, but fewer moving parts. Well, really what we're looking for you to do as a supplier is to solve problems for us, connect the dots, make these connections for us. And then finally, if you're lots of parts and lots of connections, well, really what is going to be valuable for us is if you as the supplier can drive results. Now, when you think about that, that makes sense. And then what happens is behind each of those doors, think about how many different stakeholders are involved. It's a term that we've learned to call an agreement network. So if the vendor is selling into a situation and the customer wants to complete tasks, the agreement network to navigate is going to be really small. This is the motion that we're really comfortable addressing. However, the reality is more and more things are more and more complex because the digital world is connected. It's interconnected, and there are many, many parts and many, many connections. So you have different agreement networks with which to manage, and that puts pressure on your sales people because they have to connect the dots across these patterns. Most companies don't model out these patterns, so they put the burden directly on salespeople. That's why you have these inefficiencies. So what we can do to simplify is to recognize that going into it, there's different buying archetypes that we can work backwards from. The overwhelming majority of the volume of purchases are going to be a negotiator-led type sales model. But there's aggregator type models where procurement will work with you to actually displace other suppliers. Think about that as the Kmart or the Walmart for whatever the product is that you're selling. You have decider archetypes who really want people who can come in and help drive change in their business. And then you have the driver archetype who's looking for a business partner to help them drive complex results. So those are all patterns to work backwards from. So how do we design out and orchestrate out this productitis problem? Well, the way that we do that is also relatively simple. We've all heard executive buyers want outcomes. Well, how do we pattern and orchestrate that? So we need to create a cohesive vision of economic value for customers by orchestrating outcomes for them. What's valuable here is this wheel based on interviews with lots of executive buyers. There's similar patterns of what they need. They need to see an achieved end state through the lens of themselves, the executive owner. They're going to frame out these investments as an initiative, not necessarily a product buy. They want to see measurable results, again, of the whole initiative, not just the product buy. They know that there's going to be many impacted stakeholders involved, and the help that you can do to get them on board is incredibly valuable. And they're going to want to see what results are going to look like over a life cycle. These are all knowable things. So in order to do that, there isn't one sort of generic thing. The good news is there are common patterns of how this plays out based on those agreement networks and what you're addressing. We covered this pretty well in our Route to Value webinar. So if you want to zoom into this in more detail, you can. But really, there are 6 basic patterns of value patterns that you can match to, ranging from business transformation that deals with you're going to have to get buy-in from the board of directors and the executive team, and then the 3 or 4 C-level organizations, all the way to initiative or domain-driven opportunities that are going to be driven by a manager or director inside a different silo. All of these different patterns are knowable, and you can map them out. You can map them out to those different agreement patterns so that you can have a design point, so you can have common design points, predictability, et cetera. So this is how they all plot out based on those buyer archetypes. You can use routes to value, which we've mentioned before, to design out what and clarify the economic value that you have for your own individual company. So going back to the audience, you model that out. You want to model out the agreement network for your customers. Then you want to map and organize all of the capabilities that you have that add value for that model of that customer. And then you want to make something simple, like what we like to call as a value map, to help salespeople match or connect the dots. So you build a role chart, a capability canvas, and a value map to connect the dots. These are examples of different value maps that we've built for different customers through this time based on the different outcome patterns. They're all going to look different, but they still have the same nucleus, which is you have one picture to show to a set of targeted stakeholders that's about their world, not yours. So to summarize, in terms of how we communicate it, number 1, confront the complexity. There's 4 patterns to pick from. Check the box. The next one is it matches to a perception of value. understand what that is. Then it matches to an archetype, a buyer archetype, and an agreement network. So we have a lot of the pieces already to fill out. The rest would be, what do you fill in? How do you fill in the dots to make it more valuable for yourself? So what we paid out, you need a go-to-customer strategy. To translate the strategy that you've got into what's possible for customers, you need to be able to take the parts, your capabilities, connect them through outcomes to simplify into economic value for your customers. Okay, now you got to place your bets. You can't keep spreading the pies, the peanut butter everywhere and expecting you to produce results. That's inefficient. So you're going to have to make bets to give yourself the best chance to win. So now that we know, if we think about our slot machine metaphor that we're doing, now we have to figure out, okay, if we know that which audience that we're after, how do we figure out what our messengers and message look like? How do we identify those patterns to give ourselves the best chance to succeed? Well, we want to simplify all this by designing a system that produces valuable results. So this is the construct that we want to have in our heads. We want to be visible. We want to be coordinated, predictable, well-designed. We want clear accountability. So how do we go about doing that? This isn't an organizational structure. This is a fabric that we need to lay, an execution fabric that we need to lay. Part of the reason that we need to do this is most of the motions that we design are based on the precept that sales is a linear process. Think about your marketing funnel, think about your sales funnel. Step one, do this, step two, do that. But the reality is it doesn't work that way. The reality is that your customers are going to go through a success journey, and at any point in time, they can opt out of it. They're the ones that have the power, not you. So you need to use that as a design point. How do you do that? Well, guess what? This is also predictable and knowable. You can figure out the different targeted stakeholders. Boom, we've got the buyer types. Then you figure out, how do you get access to those buyer types? How do you have successful meetings with those buyer types? How do you create a shared vision with those buyer types? How do you create a business case with those buyer types? Those are the things that are knowable as a design point. So if we want to build a system for it, we can use a canvas to identify what the cadence, so that we can create this orchestration to go through. So we can work backwards from these knowable, very measurable, binary, and customer observable measures here in these interactions. So we start out by modeling the audience. So reinforcing the same things over and over again. We've already talked about these particular patterns. Well, then we need to have a message strategy for all of these different parts. So based on the message work that we talked about before, how would you organize all of that content so that it can be served through 1 through 5 through the interactions? So if you're selling, if your solution is focused on a decider audience type, you need a thoughtful message strategy, which then needs to have a specialist type sales force so that they can connect the dots. It's really the simple, and the simplicity gets in the way because people think it's more complicated than that. And then ultimately what you've got are relationship patterns, that you can resource allocate based on a rhythm based on connecting the dots between the negotiator, the expediter, or the descriptive content. And in this case, for a responsive rhythm, you're going to scale it through automation. You're going to measure lots of high volume, and you better be cutting out labor costs. You better have as few people involved as possible, or else you're not going to be profitable in this model. There are other models too. Volume purchase agreements, improve efficiency. You want to scale through analytics. Prescriptive model is about knowledge management. You want to constantly focus on improving the workflow among all of these different people, and you want to increase the sizable profitable contracts. And then the performance rhythm, you want to maintain and grow wallet share. Key point, wallet share within those clients. And you want to optimize resource allocation because this is going to happen dynamically. You need to do that by scaling collaborative teams. The good news is if you think about a factory, think about the management of it. This clipboard is a standard clipboard that you can manage all of this stuff through. You managed by your mission is to accomplish the goals of deal size, cycle time, close rate. You manage resources by volume, by the volume of stuff going through that pipeline, the volume, the number, the value, the volume. Yeah, I got tongue tied there. And the velocity, the speed at which it's going through the pipeline. Then you want to be measuring how the effectiveness of what you're doing and the efficiency. That's it. So really what you're able to do then is to manage your factory through these rhythms. And that would be you measuring that checklist color-coded for each one of these rhythms: the responsive rhythm, accommodative rhythm, prescriptive rhythm, performance rhythm. Each one of these rhythms require different resources and different investment with which you can work with finance to figure out. It also helps you to figure out what resources to deploy and how people work together and all those wonderful things. When you're able to do that, you're able to slot out and manage your business like it's a portfolio, not a bunch of random acts, but a clear portfolio where you have your performance rhythm and where you're going to get targeted growth from, and your responsive rhythm where you're going to get targeted growth from. So you need a go-to-customer strategy. Resource allocation, the parts that you have are the resources that you need. The connections is a canvas of how you organize it. Simplified, you talk through different relationship rhythms, which give you orchestrated execution patterns. Okay, point number 5. Activities don't drive results. Move to integrated campaigns. So now what we've got is okay, here are the things that we've got so far. We've got these archetypes. We've got buyer archetypes. We've got archetypes around messengers, which should be easy to understand. We've got message strategies, probably take a while to understand a lot of those things, but we have these patterns and that makes sense. How do we string these together and connect the dots here so that we get a payout? Because if we keep coming up red, orange, and green, these dots don't connect and you don't get a payout on your slot machine. So what we need to be able to recognize is most of us who are on this call have a sales enablement background. And most of us have started out in the activity world where we're tapped on the shoulder to go do activities and produce lots and lots of mason jars. But activity doesn't produce results. So what we need to do is we need to change our thinking into services. The services that we need to be thinking about are we going to enable the pipeline? Are we going to enable the message? Are we going to enable the organization around all of those parts? Or are we going to enable talent? Each one of these things has a measurable result. Ultimately, what we want to be able to get to is where we're creating cohesion for the overall ecosystem. So the goal is to simplify by pipeline, or by message, or by organization, or by talent. So let's take one of these rhythms as an example, and let's talk about what this would look like and how you would orchestrate and move from a lot of different activities to coordinated programs. So we know that the performance rhythm, we want a driver buyer type, we want a conductor salesperson, both of which we can create more detailed specs for, and a holistic strategy. Our goal of all these parts is to maintain and grow wallet share within our clients, and to optimize results, we're going to have to design collaborative teams. So we already know that. So what we can do then is we can use a checklist. So we model even further. How do we figure out what expectations our customers have? Well, hopefully you're noticing a pattern here. Under model, you can model out the specific attributes of the outcome wheel. Then you go back to the map part and say, well, we need a value map to match to the achieved end state. We need impact propositions that match to measurable results. We need to identify who our targeted role is that we're after. Note, this is not personas. We're after the adult wallet owner who's going to make a decision that's going to be hired, fired, elevated based on the outcome that they're looking for. You need to know what the agreement network is and how the interrelationships of the people are. You need to be able to give them an outcome path and a benefit horizon. When you know those things, it's easier to identify what sales resources that you need based on their experience, their acumen, the rapport that they need to have with that executive owner, whether they have the skills to navigate the agreement network with the impacted stakeholders in a given account. What knowledge do they need to have to connect the dots between the initiative type and the outcome path? What cadence do they need to set? And are they managed based on that cadence of customers rather than the cadence of, you've got to close in the quarter and you get business in? So the way that you can do this is, and I know this is difficult because all of us are in this state where our clients are inside our company, our world is chaotic. But having the discipline to say, if I'm going to build an enabling program for pipeline, we can give it an identity. We called it Master the Middle. That was our second webinar on pipeline enablement. Or if we want to do message, we can do that for routes to value, which is one of our other ones. Organization, rhythm of business, we can concentrate on getting more clarity around resource allocation. Or for talent, which is a lot areas where a lot of us focus on, but looking at it more holistically through a hire to retire process. These are these are specific examples of programs that are going on in one of our clients. You can map out all of the different activities and start color coding them. So you have a lot of activities going on. I know it's really challenging to be able to pull it together. Just start plotting out what the different activities are and sharing this with executives. The more you share it, the more they're going to see patterns and the more they're going to want to collapse activities into one integrated program. So that allows you to highlight, guess what we need to concentrate on? Our pipeline's crap. Our message is about us. We need to fix both of these things. How do you structure that? What that looks like? Here's a template of what a routes to value program could look like. You need to have a process to drive clarity and cohesion across teams. How would you do that? How will you proactively drive change? The second thing is you need to create a codified map to convey the economic value. You need visual internal selling aids for clients that clients can consume, not pitch your stuff. You need targeted enabling adoption programs because this is really hard because it's different. Everybody has productitis, even a lot of your salespeople. And then you're going to need to be able to create an operating model to be able to anchor it. I know this looks simple and it looks very consulting-y. This is something that we're doing right now inside a very large company. In order to drive the pipeline activity and get the change going, we have immersed ourselves into the client. So the routes to value program is the tops down part. Account value mapping is immersed on the account side and where we're actually rolling up our sleeves with customers. And in between, we have a change group, a cross-functional change group to talk about what these issues are and figure it out. These are all things that you can do too. How do you do it? You plot out the different areas, you put it in stages. First stage is we have to talk to ourselves about what's possible instead of having all the constraints of what we can't do. We've got a lot of biases to overcome. That's why we led with the bias tools that we mentioned. We have to help envision success because we haven't worked together before like this. When is the last time you've had a situation where you have human resources, finance, marketing, and sales all working together? It's really great. It's also really, really hard. Then you have to create some experience simulations and manage expectations because we all know people get bent around the shape if they don't have the exact deliverable at the right time. Then you have to be able to create a working model and roll it out so you can create poster children for your salespeople and then have a phased rollout. These are all doable. They're all predictable. They all make sense. It just requires some change of doing things differently, which is what your role could be. These are all examples of what client-facing materials can look like. Each one of these different parts are their own simple thing. It's challenging to learn how to use them, but the point is there are far, far, far fewer deliverables associated with this, and you concentrate more on visuals to help engage with customers. Okay, so now you need a GoToCustomer strategy. Targeted enablement is figuring out all the activities, figuring out the dependencies, and creating an enabling program like routes to value. You can design lots of enabling programs following a formulaic path with measurable results. Okay, 6, stop trying to fix salespeople and orchestrate the environment. The overwhelming majority of focus that's happened over the past 10 years is to fix salespeople like they're the problem. What we're highlighting for you is it's the system. The system is broken, not the salespeople. So to do that, we have to create new roles or envision what can sales enablement be or new departments, all the like. Somebody has to drive cohesion for customers. Orchestrators are needed. So how do we keep winning to where we make sure that the green and green and green and every time we pull the lever pays out? The way that we do that is to lead into change. Orchestrators must be change agents. Leading into going into COVID, something that we know is that 90% of digital transformations, sales transformations have failed. These are all predictable patterns. You know this as a fellow human being. You know this to be the case. Once you start moving off a status quo earlier on or in Act 1 of any change initiative, everybody is super hopeful. It's great. Oh, this is amazing what we're going to do. When you get into the reality, oh, you want me to change? No way, right? So we want the organization to change, but the individual groups don't want to change, and you go through this disillusionment slope. What happens is when you manage change the old way, or you have a siloed thinking, what happens is when you are confronted by this disillusionment slope, what happens? Well, management doesn't want to deal with it. The juice doesn't feel worth the squeeze. So either the initiative gets terminated or the deck chairs on the Titanic are rearranged. So you reframe the delivery into something else. So somebody can call it a win, but it's really not a win. You really have just done a lot of work to reach status quo. What actually happens to make the breakthrough results? You need orchestrators to be those change agents to connect the dots. What does orchestration really look like? Well, I think we're all sick and hearing of people process technology. I think we can add in that everything is data driven and information driven. So we have to add that variable in here. But the issue is cohesion requires connections between people and process, between people and technology, between people and information, and vice versa. So you can see here, what we're talking about is cohesion. The customers demand consistency across all of these different parts. To say, well, that's not my fault, that's marketing's message, or that's not my fault, that's the salespeople weren't able to do it. From a customer standpoint, doesn't that sound stupid? Imagine you calling into customer support based on a challenge that you have with your Verizon bill, and you get, well, that's not our department, that's the billings department. You're gonna get very frustrated. And that's really what we're talking about here is how do you connect the dots to simplify working backwards from an outcome. So orchestration must happen holistically. It's not this, silos, it's this, holistic. So sales enablement must evolve to be an exclusive cross-functional role. Orchestrators, these people who are allowing the growth yield to happen, have these 6 attributes. They're mission and goal focused. They prioritize the right goals at the right moment so they can manage that change process. They guide narratives by confronting reality, which is something a lot of organizations are unable to do because they don't have the right feedback mechanisms. They drive results by design, not effort. So that's why we led with a lot of the Canvas parts earlier on. You unlock energy and create momentum by allowing the humanness to come through life, and you catalyze change through coordination. And they run their departments because they're so cross-functional, not as silos, but as businesses within a business. So maybe you start by one of the enablement. Message enablement might be an area where you start. And you say, we're going to make sure that we understand all the people involved in the pipeline process. We're clear that there's only one process for pipeline, not 17 different ones. We highlight all the technologies involved and say, do we need 34 different technologies here? And then we simplify all the information so it's not just care and feeding the process or individuals. It helps drive the goal, which is to make value for customers. And then in order to do that, you're going to need to have very strong tools to manage all of the expectations, because we all know there is a tremendous amount of expectations and frustration coming from tops down because the system isn't working. And anytime you introduce change, it's challenging. So you want to wall off and build a prototype phase where you only focus on quality. Then the next thing that you're going to need to do is figure out, hey, how do we have the muscle memory to prepare and learn how we're going to make this process more effective? And then finally, that's when we can worry about scaling. So you need a customer strategy. In order to do the growth yield, you have to recognize there's people inside your organization. The connections is the environment with which they thrive. Simplified is focusing on continuous improvement to drive proven, predictable results. So 7, you need a go-to-customer strategy to thrive in the new economy. What a go-to-customer strategy is from what? This, which is complex, to this, which is to what? Which is cohesive. You have a 2 to 3 year evolution process. If you're able to use some of the metrics that we highlighted, you're going to get the permission to drive that forward. But this over here on the left, the from what, is unsustainable. If you keep making investments on top of this platform, it will erupt. The key theme here is if you do not change the direction you're heading, you may end, if you do not change the direction, you may end up where you're heading. So here's what we told you. Sales and marketing tactics are antiquated for the modern world. Productitis is the disease. Understand it before you treat it. Clarify your economic value to customers and where you're taking them. Make your bets and give yourself the best chance to win. Activities do not drive results. Move to integrated campaigns. Stop trying to fix salespeople and orchestrate the environment. You need a go-to-customer strategy to thrive in the new economy. What are your next actions? I'd be happy to talk to you about what your plan is or how to make sense out of that. There's a link that you can follow here to get access to all of the different webinars that we've done in this commercial enablement series. Please watch, because in January, we're going to start this back up again, more through the lens of how to train or share what our insights are that we're working on with customers. Or learn more, participate, join orchestratesales.com, which is a site dedicated specifically for sales enablement leaders who are looking to evolve to be orchestrators. With that, thank you very much. Please feel free to get connected. We're going to open the lines up and ask Brian and Dave what they got from some of the chats and some things that we want some clarity on. Dave?
Yeah, great. This is Brian.
Oh, hey, Brian.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah, chat was pretty quiet, but there was some Q&A questions that came in. The first is on the commercial system. And I guess you could look at it from a couple different ways, but I think they're talking about the relationship patterns themselves. When you went through the different patterns of relationship rhythms, what's the best way to figure out which one our sales team is the question.
Well, the first question you should ask is, what business are you in? You should figure out what your buyer archetype is. The next one to figure out which your that will give you a lot more clarity for contrast of figuring out where your sales team is. But if your sales team, just some rules of thumb, if your sales team is super focused on lots and lots of activity, they're likely to be in, let me just pull that one up. They're likely to be in this pattern. The expediter pattern. If your sales leader is trying to move to, say, a challenger type model, and you're having a lot of challenge, probably what's happening is you're converting. Your sales leader wants to move to a specialist sales force, and you're moving from an expediter sales force. For your key accounts, your key accounts, you'll know more up here. So the key account people will be conductors are focused on building very specific and bespoke business strategies for clients. And you're going to deal with a whole bunch of challenges about how to virtually assign resources to these teams. Or if you're on a conductor part, these are people who are really fantastic about a one side. So think of it this way. If you've ever met somebody from EMC, the old school EMC salespeople, they were fantastic at being able to say, hey, why buy storage in pockets? Buy all of the storage from us. And there are lots of companies. If you're a company that has a broad portfolio, that's probably a play. If you're a narrow portfolio, that's probably not a play. So the rule of thumb is, if you've got a lot of people who are hyper-focused on pitch decks, they're probably an expediter. If you have people who are looking at, that are frustrated as heck, that they just don't have the vocabulary to describe what they're running into. I call that being a canary in a coal mine. They're probably trying to be a specialist, but they're being grafted on a sales engine that is designed with heavy productitis.
Great, Scott. This is Dave. Let's just take a step back. Let's just talk about change for a minute. This seems like, a fairly significant new approach compared to traditional approaches. Who assembles the commercial system? In other words, when you get into one of these kind of transformations, implementing a go-to-customer strategy, what have you seen has been the key executives that are responsible for this, and how does sales enablement leaders fit into that bigger picture?
Great question. So let me parse that out. I would say, number one, it's really not that much of a change. What's happening is your top reps are behaving in these patterns already. So the first thing that you can do is just observe where success is happening. Embrace the 80-20 rule. If you have an inside sales force, you're going to have 20% of people who are killing it. They're probably really talented and skilled at Expediter, and they won't know how to talk about what they're doing because they have what I like to call unconscious competence. If you've got a geographic or a vertical sales force, figure out the top 20% of who those are and talk to them. The point is, what makes these things valuable is that they're based on what's really happening today. So that's point number one. Now, this isn't modeled out because as a former management consultant, talking like this is challenging, and it's way easier to say, step one, you do this, step two, you do that, step three, you do this. That is a motion that's very comfortable, but it doesn't produce results. How many of you have been through a business strategy, whether it be Bain or a specialized firm, where you bring in a whole bunch of slides and they look great? Do they get implemented? No, they don't. So who actually is responsible? That's a great question. You want to find somebody who's frustrated. Your sales leader probably doesn't feel like he or she has permission to tackle City Hall on these parts. So what you do is make a deck like this, take some of these slides out and get their sponsorship, and then say, hey, sales leader, where do we go next? Your head of marketing is also probably frustrated. He or she has an idea around this message strategy, but for whatever reason, they can't get the product group to support it or connect it in with sales. So they're sniffing around that challenge too. So you can go and get sponsorship there. You can go talk to a business unit. A business unit head wants to hire their own sales team and bypass the sales and marketing group altogether. They're frustrated with the whole thing. There are many different pockets. We could even go to the sales operations or the finance group and look at the interactions and say, look how many metrics that we're tracking. Do we need to track all those metrics? Let's go back to the clipboard. The point is, when you look at the system as a whole, there's so many people who are impacted that you can make the world a better place for. You just need to find somebody to have the conversation, have the courage to do it.
Great. Another question, can you talk a little bit about some of the successes you've seen and what some of the obstacles were along the way, and how those, how you got past those to get results, and what those look like?
Yeah, so in terms of successes, it's been fascinating to see. Before COVID, most people didn't want to talk about challenges that they had in their pipeline, specifically in the middle stages of the funnel. Because COVID eliminates even the top stages of the funnel, it forces people to address it. So where the wins are is to just concentrate on what's required to move an opportunity, say from the gain access stage to the successful meeting stage. Who actually puts criteria for that? So a win for that, or an example of a win for that, is mapping that all the way through, or taking, say, the shared vision of success and connecting the business results. So by taking that value map and using it with a client, one of our clients moved for their average average revenue per transaction from $22 to $78. So these are wins that are happening in COVID right now. The difficulty, though, is those results and those giant results, which are, by the way, are repeatable from one company to the next. These massive deals are available. The issue is people's lens of what they're looking at or how they think that deal happened is very go-to-market focused. So the challenge that you've got is to help people, to equip people with the new lenses with which to see things happening. So it requires a lot of empathy. It requires patience that people don't have. It requires helping the light bulbs go off. It's really leaning into this change process that we talked about earlier on, and basically treating it like it's a story, like it's a movie, managing it like it's a movie, and knowing full well you're going to go through a lot of these different pitfalls that people have their own vision. So what I would say is, you have to first, if you want to start this journey, step number one is, as a sales enablement person, what does this mean to you? The reality is that you do this every day to some degree, shape, or form. How would you structure it and help other people realize that you're doing all this dot connection? And if you've ever done a sales kickoff, you do this. If you've ever rolled out a Challenger, you do this. The issue is you're not doing enough to organize and package up how to make this sustainable, so all the different people go off in their individual silos and build more and more things, which overwhelm salespeople. So step number one is to embrace what that is, what orchestration is, what this looks like, and talk to other people about how to make it more transferable. Then the next step would be go find an executive sponsor. And I know that sounds flippant, but you need an executive sponsor. And your executive sponsor your best executive sponsor may not be a sales leader. They may also be. So what you want is somebody who can think strategically. How do you know whether somebody can think strategically or not? Are they worrying about the next quarter, not just obsessed with this quarter? If they're obsessed with this quarter, move on and find somebody else, because there's very little that you can do between now and the end of the quarter to move the needle. You need to be working with somebody who can think beyond just the quarter. And then the next thing would be, you're still going to need to be able to connect the dots and say, let's say your sponsor is a marketer who's thinking more holistically. You're still going to need to be able to connect the dots with the sales leader. So you're going to need to have receptivity. So you're just going to need a lot of practice in terms of being empathetic, recognizing that different groups have different perspectives, and connecting the dots.
Great. And one final question. You have done 6 webinars, have had countless conversations, talked to so many people in the podcasts, and just on a day-to-day basis. Are there 2 to 3 top insights that surprised you or stood out the most during this whole post-COVID research process, and what are they?
So I would say, number one, and I shouldn't be surprised by it, but I just am, how little space companies give to talking about what the customer's experience is throughout the commercial journey. The lack of empathy of who they're talking to, the lack of understanding that you're actually asking an executive to take risk in their job, risk of how they're doing things, that you're asking that, and you're asking your salespeople to do that, and yet you don't have cross-functional role plays or conversations about it. It's always surprising, always surprising. Another thing that's surprising is how aggressive people can get with data and choke off conversations. When on the one hand, people will say we need to be open-minded and understanding and inclusive of people. On the other hand, just shut off the conversation because it doesn't fit into their narrative. And then I think the last thing that is surprising is that there's an overwhelming majority of people inside the organization that want to blame leadership, yet don't have the empathy for what leadership is trying to do. So I think that, do leaders know what's going on? Probably not. Do directors know what's going on? Probably not. But what happens is when you're in a state of change like this, people get really certain. And one of the things that's really been a big aha for me is that quote that we've used in the past from Mark Twain. It ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And in a time of crisis, people hold on to the things that they know for sure. And what's highlighting out in the data and the experiences over and over and over again, they just ain't so. So how do you create an environment where people can just be honest with each other and say, these are things that I think, are we able to observe these trends happening in the field? And can we work together to solve it? How do we let the best idea leave the room, not be the one that has the right idea?
Great. Well, thanks to everyone for attending today. Please reach out with questions to Scott and stay tuned for our next series on GoToCustomer, which we'll be announcing late this year, early next year. We hope this webinar and all those in the series have been helpful to moving forward and advancing companies, your companies, in this time of disruption and continued uncertainty. And thanks, Scott, for a great summary and end webinar covering all the topics and the research. Remember to access on orchestrate.com the webinars or growth